So we've been looking at a few of the vocabulary examples from the Make Sense and how they can be used when teaching literature. We're going to turn now to how the Common Core standards address writing in grades 6 through 8 and some really great tools from the Make Sense toolkit that you can use to address those standards. When you look at the language arts standards for writing, obviously they're a little bit different from reading, and there are four major categories. Text type and purposes, production and distribution of writing, research to build and present knowledge, and range of writing. And just like reading, each of these categories has strands of standards. So for an example, under text type and purposes, there's expressing opinions, expository writing, which are like explaining ideas, and then narrative, which are explaining a sequence of things, like the sequence of a plot, or things of that nature. So in expressing opinions, an example of the 6th grade standard would be write arguments to support claims with clear reasons and relevant evidence. Introduce claims and organize the reasons and evidence clearly. Support them with clear reasons and relevant evidence using credible sources and demonstrating an understanding of the topic, and so forth. Then grade 7 gets a little more sophisticated, and then grade 8, etc. So there are a number of strategies or tools you can use from Make Sense, and for addressing opinion, or you've got the persuasive writing, which basically opinion writing evolves into persuasive writing. And for an example, I'm going to select the two main ideas from these generic organizer smart sheets. And so if I click on two main ideas, this page opens up. And so there are a variety of different graphics or smart sheets, all of which in one way or another are addressing two main ideas and supporting points. And so what I'm going to do is select this one, the two main idea clouds, to illustrate how this works. And so let's say students are writing an opinion about a character from a story you've been reading. And so what would be the name of the character? What's the student's opinion about that character? What's one reason they feel that way? And what are supporting details that support that reason? And then what's another reason? And what is supporting details for that? Okay. Now, once students have developed this much information, then they decide which reason to really write about first, because the first reason you thought of may not be your best reason or the best reason to start with. So actually what I teach students to do is to think about your two reasons and decide which one is actually the weaker reason. And always begin with your weaker reason and then end with your strongest one. And so just because this was the first one you thought of, that might not be the weakest reason. And so decide which is the weaker reason and put a 1 here and then a 2 here, which means I'm going to write about this one and then I'm going to write about this one. And then we do the same thing with supporting points. We rank order the supporting points in terms of which one maybe is the weakest, and that would be a number 1, versus which one is the strongest, and that might be this one, and actually number 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the order is from weakest to strongest supporting points. And then basically follow the numbers, just like you paint by numbers, to use that as a guide for writing your about your opinion and providing supporting reasons and details. It's very simple, but yet very powerful. Another one you can use is the two main idea frame, which essentially does the same thing as the clouds. Main idea frame essentially does the same thing as the clouds, and you have this is about, so your topic, and then what's your opinion about the topic. For each main idea, that's of course where you put your reasons. What's different is down here where it says so what's important to understand about this. So this adds a dimension to this in terms of drawing a conclusion to end your essay that's expressing your opinion about something. So you have a topic, what's your opinion about it, what's reason number 1 and your supporting points, reason number 2, and then so what can you conclude? For expository writing, there's several tools in the Make Sense that can be useful for that. An example of one of those standards is write informative or explanatory text to examine a topic and convey ideas, concepts, and information through a selection, organization, and analysis of the relevant content. So for an example, introduce a topic, organize the ideas and concepts and information using strategies such as definition, classification, compare and contrast, and cause and effect. Include formatting, graphics, charts, and tables, multimedia, useful in aiding comprehension, and so forth. So, if we look at the Make Sense Strategies homepage, and there are a variety of tools that we could use for that, and we're going to highlight a couple of them. Since it's addressing both compare and contrast and cause and effect, as well as explaining an idea, almost any of the ones from the Organizer Smartsheet portion of the software will be useful in expository writing. Also in literature, some of the smart sheets we were looking at earlier for character analysis, plot analysis, and so forth, almost any of those will be very useful for expository writing as well. Also, there's a whole section that deals with writing and in terms of expository writing, and you can take a look. We'll take a look at some of those. So, just to look at some of these, we're going to start by identifying. We're going to look at a 3 main idea, and click on that, and that will take us to this page. And we're going to look at this particular one called the 3 main idea frame. And what we'll do for expository writing is we're going to teach students a strategy called PLANS, P-L-A-N-S. Now, PLAN stands for preview, and we're going to do 2 things. We're going to preview the path, and I'll explain what path means in a second. So we're going to preview the path that we're going to take, and then preview words to use. Then we're going to list our ideas, and then we're going to assign order to those ideas, and then turn those ideas into sentences, note sentences, and then finally search for errors and correct. For an example, the P step in PLANS, preview the path. Path stands for purpose. What's the purpose of the writing? And this example is like to get people to protect eagles. And then the A is the audience. Think about who you want to read this, who's your audience, and keep that audience in mind as you're composing it. So in this case, the audience are going to be kids my age. What's your topic? Eagle problems. And what's your hook? Hook is something you say very early on to get people interested in reading the rest of the essay. Say something really kind of a grabber at the beginning. And so my hook is going to be baby eagles. The second part of preview is preview words to use. And so what we do before we even start worrying about putting stuff on an organizer is simply brainstorm a list of related words that I might use when I'm writing about bald eagles. So we're just brainstorming words, we're not organizing or anything else. And so an example is bald eagles nest, they're majestic, they're in danger, it's our national bird, DDT, etc. And so we're not worried about organizing them, we're just getting the words out on a piece of paper. The next step we're going to do is list main ideas and details on a think sheet. So for an example, bald eagles is about interesting things about our national bird. And so and then what we're going to do is list the main ideas to be discussed. Like we're going to talk about how they're in danger, talk about baby bald eagles and what they eat. And then for each of these, we're going to list the various specific points we want to make about that main idea. So in terms of how they're in danger, that farmers put DDT on the crops to kill bugs, fish eat the bugs that washed into the water, eagle eats the fish and the DDT gets into them, and that DDT makes the eggshells really thin so they break, thus endangering baby bald eagles from being born. And so we basically go through each of these and list what are the specific points or details we want to say about each main idea. Finally, we're going to address a so what statement and what's important to understand about this whole thing. So for an example, next time you see a picture of a bald eagle, think about how they're in danger. The A step is assign numbers to indicate order. And so what we're going to do is something similar that we were talking about early, is decide what order to present these main ideas, because the first thing you thought of isn't necessarily the best thing to write about first. And so we're just looking at the main ideas, and what we're going to do is order them by saying, okay, I'm going to write about baby bald eagles first, and then I'm going to write about what they eat, and then how they're in danger. Then what we're going to do is order the details. And because again, the first detail you think of isn't necessarily the best one to write about first. So in this case, how they lay only 2 or 3 eggs at a time, and the eggs are whites with blue spots, and we'll write about that first, and then about how long it takes for them to hatch, and then that they have brown heads, not white ones, and then finally what happens if it falls out of the nest. And so what we'll do is we'll go through and order the details for each of the main ideas and so forth. And now what we've got is a completed smart visual that addresses the critical information that has the basis for presenting a really well organized essay. And so what we teach students to do is to begin by using this as your introductory paragraph with a hook in it. And then each of these represents a separate a separate paragraph, and then ending, of course, with your so what. So here's how that looks. We're going to note the ideas and sentences following in your plan. And so the opening paragraph introduces the topic. For example, you probably know that the bald eagle is a national bird, and you've seen it on U.S. symbols and money. There are many interesting things about bald eagles. And then the next paragraph introduces the first main idea. Now, my PowerPoint here is not showing the paragraph beginning, but it should have. It's something fluky going on with PowerPoint. But anyway, bald eagles don't have many babies, so they're starting with this paragraph, and then they go on, and oh, there it's working now. Okay, so bald eagles don't have many babies. They usually lay only one or two or three eggs at a time, and so forth. And so what we teach students to do is for each idea listed in a box on your planner to write a minimum of one complete sentence, but try to write more sentences about each idea. And so it's not about one idea, one sentence, but rather you use as many sentences as it takes to really explain the idea. So for an example, although you have 4 different ideas under baby bald eagles, you may end up with a lot more sentences because you're using however many sentences necessary to really explain each idea. So anyway, when they're through writing about this, then you go on to the next topic, and that represents a new paragraph. And then finally this one. So basically the mystery of when do you need to start a new paragraph has been solved by the way they've used the organizer form. Examples of some other types of smart visuals that you might want to use with expository writing are some of the compare and contrasts. And so I clicked on matrix with double conclusions, and I'm going to illustrate how that works. Here's one where, and one of the standards, in fact, requires students to compare literature from different parts of the world that are addressing similar stories. And this is an example of how you might do that. Lon Po Po is a Little Red Riding Hood type story that's similar to Little Red Riding Hood, but came out of China. And so the way we would set this up to explain the similarities or differences between the two is we'd have main ideas like the setting, characters, plot, and solution, and then the features of Lon Po Po, and then the features of Little Red Riding Hood. And then, so what would you conclude about these two settings? What would you conclude about the characters in these two stories? What would you conclude about the plots and so forth? Likewise, what would you conclude about Lon Po Po? And what could you conclude overall about Little Red Riding Hood? So this is an excellent tool for addressing that type of thing, and it illustrates how you can use a compare and contrast smart sheet for expository writing in literature. Another one is under the area of sequence, and if you click on steps for an example, this page will open up. And so here's an illustration of when you're explaining the steps to something. And this is steps with details. So each step, the way this is set up is you have what's the gist or main idea of the step, and then what are supporting details for each step. So these make really excellent writing tools. You may be amazed at how the improvement you get with students writing when you use these kinds of structures. Now what I'm going to do is go down to the literature section of the software, and we're going to click on literary analysis. And one of the things that students typically have to write about are the themes of stories. So for an example, Students often struggle with identifying what the theme is, and so this particular SMART visual provides a list of what are some of the most common themes in literature first, and so it's much easier to figure out the theme of a story if you know what possible themes might be out there. And so while this is certainly not a comprehensive set of themes, there are many, many more. These are certainly some of the most common ones, like the triumph of good over evil, or search for one's destiny, the price of love, search for significance, and so forth. And so the way this works is you pick out what you think the theme is, and if it's different from up here, you can always list a different one. And then what you have to do is provide evidence of the theme in the story. And so that's what goes here. And so if you think the theme is price of war, then where in the story do you make, does that is it addressed? So for example, when the cousins visit from the south and talk of war with the Crichtons, and the explanation, you have to explain why this happens or why you think this supports this theme. The Crichtons, a family living in southern Illinois, don't wish for war. Most family members support the North while relatives support the South. And so what you're basically doing is looking for evidence in the story that supports your choice of theme and then explaining why you think that's good evidence. Another one is literary devices. And there are obviously many literary devices that might be used, but in some cases students are expected to know what they are and recognize how they're showing up in literature. And so again, what I've done is created a list of the most common ones. And of course you have to explain what these are and give examples of them and so forth before students can pick them out from literature. But so for an example, they may have no idea what a hyperbole is or what an oxymoron is and that sort of thing. So we have to define those and look at examples first. But anyway, once they know what they are, then you have these lists of them. And then you look for evidence of how they occur in the story. So for an example, in Charlotte's Web, that uses irony, satire, anthropomorphism, and the control or lack of control over destiny. And so what would be evidence of the literary device in the story? And so for anthropomorphism, that's when Charlotte and Wilbur have human qualities. And explanation is Charlotte writes words in her webs about Wilbur's excellence, like humble and so forth. Irony, and that's when Wilbur gets bigger but yet is less likely to get killed. And an explanation of that, etc. So you can see how we've used this fairly simple smart sheet to help students be successful at tasks like this where they have to recognize different literary devices and how they're used in literature, and then explain and provide evidence from the text of how that occurs, which is again the type of thing that we have to do with the Common Core standards now. Poem analysis is another excellent one that you can use, and this can be either poem or lyrics. And here's a really pretty cool one for doing that. For an example, what's the poem and what's the gist of what it's about? Who's the speaker? When reading the poem, who's the speaker? Tone, how's the speaker seem to feel about the subject of the poem? Symbolism, do objects and things in the poem represent other stuff, and how? Is like, is the speaker comparing things or saying what something is like, and how? Theme, what's the message about life in the poem? So what I'll share with you is an example of how that would apply to the song or the lyrics to the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So what I'll do when I'm using these with students is we're going to start with lyrics of a song that students are very familiar with and analyze those lyrics from that perspective, and then later on apply it to poetry that's going to be new and novel to them where it may be more difficult to use this. So we're scaffolding the complexity of the use of the tool by doing that. Finally, speech analysis is another one for expository writing that can be really helpful. With speech analysis, it's similar to poem analysis in that you have the speech and what the gist of what the speech was about. You have the speaker, and it's like who is the speaker and who is being addressed by the speech. Tone, how does the speaker seem to feel about the subject of the speech or the topic? Symbolism, does it represent, do they use things that represent is like? Is the speaker comparing things or saying what something is like and how? And theme, what's the message about life in the speech? And here's an example from the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, under these sections of writing area, editing and revising is another big part of those standards, as is publishing. And so notice that when you're analyzing these standards, they not only address the ability to do editing and revising, but they also address the providing peers with feedback on their writing. And so if you click under the section of writing, over here on resources, what I'm going to do is share with you an editing strategy that might be helpful, very helpful for middle school students. So when you click on that, it will open this page. And down here, there's a word called scope. And so if you click on scope, what it will do is open up resources for this editing strategy. So I'm going to explain this to you. Scope stands for spelling, capitalization, omissions, punctuation, and ear. And so, for example, under spelling, look carefully at each word to make sure it's spelled correctly. If you're unsure, ask someone for help. Oh, wait, I've got a spelling error there. Let me fix that. All right, spell correctly. Capitalization, capitalize the first word, letter of every sentence. Capitalize all proper nouns. I've got a problem there. Need to fix. Omissions, watch out for words accidentally left of sentences. That doesn't make sense. Let's see. Oh, I've got an omission there. Punctuation, the end of every sentence has a punctuation mark. Use commas for things in a series like apples, oranges, and pears. Use commas following coordinating conjunctions and dependent clauses. And if you're unsure, ask someone. Got a punctuation error there. Now, so spelling, capitalization, omissions, and punctuations are pretty self-explanatory. Ear is a little bit different because ear is all about finding sentences that don't make sense and fix them. And you don't see those, you hear them. And so for ear, you read your essay out loud and you listen for making sense sentences that don't make and correct them. Oh, wait, that doesn't make sense. How about listen for sentences that don't make sense and correct them? In other words, read it out loud and listen and then fix the sentences that don't make sense. Also, listen for sentences that are awkward because they're worded strangely and too many words written to say what you want to say, and refine them. That's pretty awkward in and of itself. Let's fix that one. Listen for awkward sounding sentences and refine them. Listen for mismatches in the use of singulars and plural. I got to fix that mismatch. Listen for switches in verb tense and corrected them. So obviously that's just kind of a fun way of presenting the scope strategy. The idea is you scope your work to look and find and fix errors and so forth. So that's just kind of an overview of some of the resources on the Make Sense toolkit that you can use for addressing the writing standards. There are a whole lot more, but I wanted to give you a sense of what you can do to address those standards and how the Make Sense resources can help you get that done. In the next video, it's pretty brief, but what we're going to do is take a look at some of the resources for project-based learning, which is part of the writing standards in terms of conducting research and making presentations and that sort of thing.